Sunlight, filtered through the lace curtains, painted a warm glow across the worn wooden table in the farmhouse kitchen. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sweet scent of Martha's famous blueberry muffins, a comforting symphony that had filled this room for 50 years. Joseph, his silver hair catching the light, sat across from her, a small velvet box cradled in his hands. He watched Martha, a quiet smile playing on his lips. Her face, etched with the gentle passage of time, was more beautiful to him now than it had ever been. He'd known, the moment he saw her across the crowded university hall all those years ago, that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. A life he never could have imagined, a life overflowing with a love that deepened with each passing year. "Happy anniversary, my dear," he said, his voice a low rumble, roughened by age yet filled with warmth. 50 years together. Martha's eyes, the same vibrant blue as the cornflowers that bloomed along the edge of their fields, crinkled at the corners. 50 years. A lifetime. She'd seen the world change around them, seen their dreams take flight and soar beyond their wildest imaginings. "And many more to come," she replied, her voice carrying the same melodic lilt he remembered from their courtship days. He slid the velvet box across the table. She opened it slowly, her breath catching in her throat. Nestled within the plush lining was a delicate silver brooch, shaped like a single, perfect blueberry blossom. Tiny sapphires glittered like dewdrops. "You made this," she whispered, tracing the delicate curves of the metal with a trembling fingertip. He'd always been clever with his hands, a tinkerer and inventor since boyhood. He chuckled, a deep, resonant sound. "Thought it had matched your Sunday dress," he said, a playful twinkle in his eyes. He knew she treasured the simple things, the pieces of their life together woven into the fabric of their home. Martha carefully pinned the brooch to her dress, the cool silver a comforting weight against her skin. "It's beautiful, Joseph. Truly." She reached across the table, her hand covering his. The warmth of her touch sent a familiar tremor through him. A comfortable silence settled between them, filled with unspoken words and shared memories. "Our Timothy's graduation is next weekend," Martha said, breaking the quiet reverie. "What should we get him?" Joseph stroked his chin, his gaze drifting towards the window overlooking the fields. Timothy, their grandson, the bright spark in their lives. They wanted to give him something special, something meaningful. His gaze fell upon the antique pocket watch that rested on the mantelpiece. It had belonged to his father, a simple, elegant timepiece that had marked the passing of generations. "The watch," he said, a sudden clarity in his voice. "I'll have it restored." It's time he had it. Martha followed his gaze. The watch, a tangible piece of their family history. "That's a wonderful idea, Joseph." She paused, a flicker of concern crossing her face. "Where should we take it? It needs a true craftsman." Joseph considered this. "Finest Jewels," he said after a moment. "I've heard they handle delicate restorations." He remembered seeing an advertisement in the local paper, boasting of their expertise with antique timepieces. Martha nodded, a slight frown tugging at her lips. "Finest Jewels," she echoed. She'd heard whispers about the place, about its exclusivity, its exorbitant prices, its clientele. A place that catered to the wealthy elite, a world far removed from their quiet, unassuming life. A small, insistent voice of unease whispered in the back of her mind. They didn't belong in that world, not anymore. They'd built their fortune quietly, discreetly, channeling their resources into their philanthropic endeavors, into making the world a better place, not into flaunting their wealth. She pushed the unease aside. It was just a watch, after all, a gift for their grandson. The drive into the city was a stark contrast to the tranquil serenity of their farm. The sleek, modern buildings seemed to scrape the sky, the streets teeming with hurried, preoccupied faces. Joseph parked their modest sedan a block away from Finest Jewels. As they walked towards the store, Martha couldn't help but feel a growing sense of displacement. The glittering display windows, showcasing dazzling diamonds and intricate gold necklaces, seemed to mock their simple attire. She glanced at Joseph, his hand clasped tightly around the small velvet pouch containing the watch. He looked out of place here, his worn tweed jacket and comfortable shoes a stark contrast to the sharply dressed figures hurrying past. Martha took a deep breath, steeling herself. It was just a watch. They were here for Timothy. She pushed open the heavy glass door, the chime announcing their arrival like an unwelcome intrusion. The air inside was cool and crisp, scented with an unfamiliar perfume, a mixture of expensive floral notes that made her head spin slightly. The store was impeccably decorated, with plush carpets and sparkling chandeliers, creating an atmosphere of opulent exclusivity. A young woman, impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit, glanced up from the display case she was polishing. Her eyes swept over Martha and Joseph, taking in their simple clothes, their unassuming demeanor. A flicker of disdain crossed her face, so quick Martha almost missed it. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice polite but lacking any genuine warmth. "We'd like to inquire about having a pocket watch restored," Martha said, her voice calm and steady, betraying none of the unease she felt churning within her. Joseph opened the pouch, revealing the antique timepiece. The saleswoman, whose name tag identified her as Miranda, barely glanced at the watch. "We specialize in high-end timepieces," she said, her tone subtly dismissive. "Restorations can be quite costly." She didn't even bother to take the watch from Joseph's outstretched hand. "We understand," Martha replied, her patience beginning to wear thin. She could feel Joseph's quiet dignity beside her, a silent strength that anchored her. He met her gaze, his eyes holding a steady, unwavering light. A man in a sharply tailored suit approached them, his expression mirroring the saleswoman's disdain. "Is there a problem, Miranda?" he asked, his voice smooth and condescending. He introduced himself as Bradley Wellington, the store manager. "These customers are inquiring about a restoration," Miranda said, her tone dripping with barely concealed contempt. Bradley Wellington gave the watch a cursory glance, his lip curling slightly. "I'm afraid we don't handle sentimental pieces," he said, his voice laced with thinly veiled sarcasm. "Perhaps you'd be better off at a less specialized establishment." Martha felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, rising within her. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. "This watch belonged to my husband's father," she said, her voice even and controlled. "It's a family heirloom." Bradley Wellington waved a dismissive hand. "I understand," he said, his tone patronizing, "but I'm afraid we simply don't have the resources to dedicate to such projects. Perhaps you should try a pawn shop." He turned to Miranda, his voice low and sharp. "We need to keep this establishment pristine. Certain clientele can detract from the image we cultivate." Martha felt a cold fury settle in her chest. She glanced at Joseph, his face a mask of quiet composure. She knew him well enough to see the hurt simmering beneath the surface, the quiet dignity he maintained even in the face of such blatant disrespect. This, she thought, was unacceptable. She reached in her purse, her fingers closing around her phone. "I believe," she said, her voice dangerously soft, "I need to make a phone call." The bell above the door chimed a delicate melody, a stark contrast to the churning unease in Martha's stomach. Finest jewels lived up to its name. Crystal chandeliers dripped with light, reflecting off polished glass displays showcasing glittering treasures. The air, conditioned to a perfect chill, carried a faint scent of sandalwood and money. Joseph, beside her, seemed oblivious to the opulent intimidation of the place. His gaze, soft and unassuming, was fixed on the worn leather strap of the pocket watch nestled in his palm. He'd carried it like a talisman since his father's passing. Martha smoothed down the simple cotton dress she wore. She hadn't bothered to dress up for this errand. Clothes, for her, were a practical necessity, not a statement. But as the security guard's eyes swept over them, lingering a beat too long on their sensible shoes and Joseph's faded denim jacket, a familiar prickle of annoyance crawled up her spine. She recognized that look, the silent appraisal, the instant categorization. It was a look she'd received countless times in boardrooms filled with men in tailored suits who underestimated her quiet power. "Can I help you?" The receptionist, perched behind a sleek, marble desk, inquired with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her gaze flitted dismissively over their attire. "We're here about a custom piece," Martha replied, her voice calm and even, despite the tightening in her chest. She held the receptionist's gaze, willing the woman to see past the simple facade. The receptionist's smile faltered slightly. "The wait for custom work is considerable," she said, a subtle inflection in her tone suggesting a veiled warning. "We're not in a hurry," Joseph interjected gently, opening his palm to reveal the antique pocket watch. Its gold casing, though tarnished with age, still held a quiet elegance. "This is my father's. I'd like to have it restored for my grandson's graduation." Martha saw a flicker of something akin to pity in the receptionist's eyes. Pity for them. The absurdity of it almost made her laugh. "I see," the receptionist said, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. "Perhaps I should have Mr. Wellington speak with you." Mr. Wellington, the store manager, emerged from a back office, his tailored suit and slick-back hair screaming success, or at least the performance of it. He extended a hand to Joseph, his grip firm, but his eyes already scanning their clothes, calculating their worth. "Custom pieces typically start at $20,000, Bradley Wellington announced smoothly, his voice laced with a practiced charm that felt as hollow as the gold-plated trinkets in the display cases. Martha felt Joseph tense beside her. $20,000, a drop in the ocean compared to their actual worth. A sum they donated to clean water initiatives in a single quarter. The irony gnawed at her. "We hadn't set a specific limit," Martha responded, meeting Bradley Wellington's gaze directly. "Whatever it takes to make it special." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Wellington's face. He glanced at the receptionist, a silent communication passing between them. Martha recognized the unspoken words. "Are these people serious?" Of course," Wellington said, recovering quickly. His smile, however, seemed a fraction less genuine. He gestured vaguely toward a display of modern, minimalist watches. "Perhaps while you wait, you might be interested in some of our more accessible pieces." The word accessible hung in the air, thick with condescension. Martha felt a wave of anger wash over her, but she forced it down, replacing it with a glacial calm. She played this game before, the game of underestimated appearances. Joseph, bless his heart, remained oblivious to the subtle insults. His focus was solely on the watch in his hand, a tangible link to his past, a legacy he wanted to pass on to his grandson. "No, thank you," Martha said, her voice soft yet firm. "We are only interested in the restoration." She paused, letting the silence stretch, then added, "This watch, it has sentimental value." Wellington's smile tightened. He clearly didn't understand the true meaning of the word sentimental. He probably measured value solely in carats and dollar signs. "Well, I'll have Miranda bring you the paperwork," he said, his tone now edged with impatience. He seemed eager to be rid of them. He turned to the receptionist, his voice dropping to a low murmur Martha could just barely overhear. "Sure they can even afford the appraisal fee?" The receptionist giggled softly, a sound that grated on Martha's nerves. Miranda, a young sales associate with perfectly coiffed hair and a designer handbag slung over her shoulder, approached them with a stack of forms, her expression mirroring the receptionist's earlier disdain. Martha took the forms, her fingers brushing against Miranda's perfectly manicured hand. A faint, sweet scent of expensive perfume wafted from the younger woman. Martha's grip tightened on the papers. A plan began to form in her mind. A quiet, subtle plan that would teach these people a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. They wanted to play a game of appearances? Fine. She would play too, but she would play to win. The cool air of finest jewels, scented faintly with sandalwood and something metallic, did little to soothe the simmering irritation beneath Martha's placid facade. Crystal chandeliers dripped with light, reflecting off glass, cases filled with glittering treasures. It was the kind of opulence that Martha usually found vulgar, a blatant display of wealth she and Joseph had consciously avoided in their own lives. Yet here they were, surrounded by it, treated as though they didn't belong. Joseph, ever patient, ran a thumb over the worn silver of his pocket watch. Perhaps they simply misunderstood, he murmured, his voice low and calm. Martha's smile was tight. Misunderstood? Hardly. The condescension radiating from the young manager, Bradley, was palpable. He hadn't even bothered to hide it, steering them away from the central displays towards a corner filled with what he termed their more accessible items. Accessible. The word grated on her nerves. As if their 50 years of quiet, impactful philanthropy, their contributions to clean water technology that had saved countless lives, counted for nothing in this temple of superficiality. Their simple attire, chosen for comfort, not show, had become a mark against them, a barrier between them and the respect they deserved. She studied Bradley, his slicked-back hair, the too-tight suit, the forced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. A boy playing dress-up in a world he didn't understand. "These are nice," Joseph said diplomatically, peering at a display of modern, sleek watches. Martha knew he wasn't impressed. His father's watch, a weighty piece of history, held far more value than these shiny trinkets. "Do you have anything with custom gemstone work?" Martha asked, her voice carefully neutral. She knew exactly what she wanted: a restoration. Not a replacement, but she wanted to see how far Bradley would take this charade. Bradley's smile faltered. "Those pieces are in our premium collection, madam," he said smoothly, "shown by appointment only to qualified buyers." "Qualified buyers?" Martha echoed, her eyebrow arching almost imperceptibly. The subtle shift in her demeanor, so slight Joseph might not have noticed, was a warning sign Bradley clearly missed. "We need to ensure serious interest, you understand," chimed in Miranda, the sales associate, her tone dripping with false sweetness. Her eyes flickered over Martha's simple dress and Joseph's worn jacket. A silent judgment passed. Martha felt a cold anger bloom her chest. These children, playing at sophistication, dared to dismiss them? Inside, a quiet voice whispered, "Patience, Martha." Years of boardroom battles, of navigating the cutthroat world of business, had taught her the power of restraint. The greater the fall, the more satisfying the impact. "I see," Martha said, her voice still calm, a deceptive stillness before the storm. She glanced at Joseph, a silent communication passing between them, a shared understanding forged over decades. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Perhaps," Martha continued, her gaze returning to Bradley, "you could tell us more about the qualifications required to view your premium collection." Bradley shifted uneasily, the veneer of professional courtesy beginning to crack. "Well, it's primarily a matter of," he hesitated, searching for a delicate way to phrase his prejudice. "Financial capacity, you see. We handle very exclusive pieces." The air thickened with unspoken accusations. Martha felt a flicker of amusement, a dark, sardonic twist in her gut. This young man, so eager to dismiss them, so certain of their insignificance, was about to learn a very expensive lesson. "Financial capacity," Martha repeated, letting the words hang in the air. She reached into her purse, a simple, unbranded leather bag that likely cost less than Bradley's tie, and retrieved her phone. Her fingers danced across the screen, pulling up a number she knew by heart. "Perhaps," she said, her voice now edged with steel, "you should speak with Mr. Thornon. He can vouch for our financial capacity." She held out the phone to Bradley, who stared at it, his face a mask of confusion. He took the phone hesitantly, his eyes darting from Martha to the number on the screen. James Thornon. The name resonated, even in his limited world. A financial titan, a name whispered with respect, even awe, in the highest circles. What connection could these people have with someone like James Thornon? As Bradley fumbled with the phone, his hand trembling slightly, Martha allowed herself a small, inward smile. The game was afoot. The subtle shift in power, the unspoken tension in the air, crackled with anticipation. The glittering jewels in their cases seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Joseph stood beside her, a silent pillar of strength, his hand finding hers beneath the counter. His touch, warm and familiar, was a grounding force in the midst of the brewing storm. He knew, without a word spoken, what she was about to do, and he approved. The cool air of finest jewels, once a symbol of their exclusion, now felt charged with the promise of retribution. The silence stretched, taut and brittle, as Bradley put the phone to his ear, the unspoken question hanging heavy in the air. Who were these people, really? The afternoon sun glinted off the polished brass handles of finest jewels' imposing entrance, mocking the worn leather of Joseph's well-loved briefcase. Martha felt a familiar tightness in her chest, a sensation she'd thought she'd long conquered. It wasn't about the slight, not entirely. It was the echo of a lifetime of being underestimated, of being seen as less than. She smoothed down her simple wool coat, a wry smile touching her lips. They had dressed for comfort, not to impress, a choice she wouldn't regret. Joseph, ever patient, squeezed her hand, his gaze fixed on the intricate clockwork displayed in the window. He hadn't noticed the dismissive glances, the barely concealed sneers. Or perhaps he had, and simply chose to ignore them, as he always did. His world revolved around the quiet intricacies of mechanics, not the superficialities of human interaction. "Give me a moment, Joseph." Martha's voice was calm, a thin sheet of ice over a deep, cold lake. She stepped away, the cool air balm against the rising heat in her cheeks. She pulled out her phone, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "James, it's Martha Reynolds," she said, her voice regaining its usual warmth. A flicker of satisfaction danced within her. Some performances were for an audience of one. Finest jewels downtown. Could you come by? And bring Edward with the papers. There was a brief pause, a murmur on the other end, and then, "Of course, Martha." 15 minutes. Martha disconnected, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. 15 minutes. It would be enough. Joseph watched her, a question in his gentle eyes. "Everything all right, Martha?" He had a way of seeing through her, even when she tried her hardest to maintain her composure. "Just a minor adjustment," she replied, her gaze drifting back to the store's entrance. The staff, she noted, had congregated near the window, their whispered conversations punctuated by pointed glances in their direction. Let them watch. Let them wonder. The Bentley, sleek and black as a raven's wing, pulled up to the curb precisely 14 minutes later. James Thornton, his silver hair gleaming in the sunlight, emerged, followed by Edward, his young legal associate, clutching a thick folder. Martha felt a surge of something akin to amusement. Overkill, perhaps, but satisfying nonetheless. "Mrs. Reynolds, Mr. Reynolds," James greeted them warmly, extending a hand to each. His voice, though respectful, carried an undercurrent of knowing amusement. He'd witnessed these scenarios before. "What can we do for you today?" he asked, his eyes flicking towards the store entrance. The staff inside, their faces now a mixture of curiosity and unease, watched the scene unfold. "Just a little misunderstanding," Martha replied, her voice laced with a delicate irony that only James would fully appreciate. Edward, oblivious to the underlying tension, opened the folder and presented a series of documents to Martha and Joseph. They were copies of recent grants awarded by the Reynolds Foundation, millions of dollars channeled towards clean water initiatives in developing countries, alongside the incorporation papers of Reynolds Clean Technologies, a company now valued in the billions. Martha glanced at the documents, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Bradley," she called out, her voice carrying across the street, sharp enough to pierce the glass facade of finest jewels. The manager, Bradley Wellington, hesitated for a moment, then reluctantly emerged from the store, his face a mask of forced politeness. "Mrs. Reynolds," he began, his voice strained, "is there something I can help you with?" Martha gestured towards James and Edward. "Bradley, I believe you're acquainted with Mr. Thornton, our financial advisor, and Mr. Edward, our legal counsel." Bradley's eyes darted between the immaculately dressed men and the modestly clad couple before him, his mind struggling to reconcile the stark disparity. He stammered a greeting, his carefully constructed facade of arrogance crumbling. "Bradley," Martha continued, her voice soft yet edged with steel, "we were just discussing the interesting customer service we received in your establishment." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "It seems there's been a slight misjudgment. Perhaps you and your staff could benefit from a refresher course in recognizing true value. It doesn't always come packaged in designer labels." The color drained from Bradley's face. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Inside the store, Miranda, her face ashen, averted her gaze. The other staff members stood frozen, their earlier disdain replaced by a mixture of shame and fear. Joseph, throughout the entire exchange, had remained silent, his gaze fixed on the documents in his hand. He wasn't interested in the spectacle, in the public shaming. His focus was on a watch tucked safely in his briefcase, the watch that held a lifetime of memories, a legacy he wanted to pass on to his grandson. He finally looked up, his eyes meeting Martha's. There was a quiet understanding between them, a shared history of overcoming adversity, of building something meaningful from humble beginnings. "Perhaps," Joseph said, his voice gentle yet firm, "we should take our business elsewhere." He placed the documents back in Edward's hands, took Martha's arm, and turned to leave. As they walked away, the setting sun cast long shadows behind them, shadows that seemed to stretch back across decades of quiet resilience, of unwavering dedication, of a wealth that went far beyond the glittering displays of finest jewels. The silence that followed their departure was deafening, broken only by the faint chime of the store's door, a sound that echoed the hollow victory of appearances over substance. The bell above the door chimed, a discordant melody against the sudden, suffocating silence that had fallen within finest jewels. Martha Reynolds, her hand still resting lightly on her husband Joseph's arm, felt a small, private smile tug at the corner of her lips. The air, thick with tension moments before, now crackled with a different energy fear. Bradley, the store manager, his face a ghastly shade of pale, stammered something unintelligible as a distinguished man in a tailored suit strode towards them. He hadn't even glanced at the glittering displays, his focus solely on the elderly couple standing by the counter. Martha watched, a quiet observer of the swift shift in power, the realization dawning on Bradley's face like a slow sunrise. He knows, she thought, a sliver of ice in her otherwise calm demeanor. Joseph, ever the stoic, merely straightened his slightly worn jacket, his gaze fixed on the intricate workings of his antique pocket watch, a silent symbol of generations past. "Mr. Harrington," Bradley choked out, his voice barely a whisper against the backdrop of the store's hushed elegance. "I wasn't expecting—" Charles Harrington, the owner of Finest Jewels, cut him off with a curt nod. His eyes, sharp and discerning, settled on Martha and Joseph. "You've just insulted Martha and Joseph Reynolds," he stated, his voice low and controlled, yet carrying an undeniable weight. A ripple of shock went through Miranda, the sales associate. She clutched her sales pad, knuckles white, as if it were a lifeline. "He knows their names," she thought, bewildered. How could he possibly know their names? Just moments ago, they were just another elderly couple, easily dismissed, their worn clothes a testament to their supposed insignificance. Now, the air vibrated with the unspoken question, "Who are they?" Bradley's face contorted in a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. Reynolds Clean Technologies? He stammered, the name a brand synonymous with innovation and, more importantly, immense wealth. He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. He'd seen their logo countless times, plastered across news articles and philanthropic campaigns. He'd simply never connected the image of the impeccably dressed CEOs with the humble couple standing before him. Charles Harrington's gaze remained fixed on Bradley. Reynolds Clean Technologies, he confirmed, his voice even, currently valued at approximately $87 billion. The figure hung in the air, a heavy, suffocating weight. $87 billion. Bradley felt a dizzying wave of nausea. He dismissed, nay insulted, individuals whose fortune could buy and sell his entire existence multiple times over. Joseph, his gaze still on his watch, spoke for the first time since entering the store. His voice, though quiet, commanded attention. "My father gave me this watch. I wanted it restored for my grandson's graduation." His words were simple, yet the weight of the unspoken accusation hung heavy in the air. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made demands, yet the simple statement of his intention was more damning than any outburst could have been. Martha, sensing the shift in her husband's demeanor, placed a comforting hand on his. She looked at Charles Harrington, her eyes reflecting a mix of weariness and quiet strength. "We were told our business wasn't wanted here," she stated, her voice calm, yet laced with an underlying steel. "You owe Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds an apology," Charles Harrington said, his voice unwavering. His gaze bore into Bradley, sharp and unforgiving. The unspoken message was clear. Failure to comply will have consequences. Bradley's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He struggled to find words, his carefully constructed world of appearances and superficial judgments crumbling around him. Finally, he managed a choked, I apologize. I made inexcusable assumptions." He looked at Martha and Joseph, his eyes pleading for understanding, but he knew, deep down, that the damage was irreparable. Miranda, her face ashen, echoed the apology, her voice barely above a whisper. The humiliation was a bitter pill to swallow, a stark contrast to the condescending superiority she displayed only moments ago. Charles Harrington addressed Martha and Joseph directly, his tone softening slightly. "The watch will be restored, of course, at no charge, and we will personally deliver it to your grandson." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "This incident's a learning opportunity for us all. What matters is learning from them." Martha met his gaze, a subtle nod acknowledging his words. "Indeed," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Some lessons are more valuable than any monetary transaction." Her eyes flickered towards Bradley and Miranda, a silent reminder of the price of prejudice. Charles Harrington turned to address his staff, his voice regaining its professional edge. "Some personnel changes will be made effective immediately," he announced, his gaze lingering on Bradley. The air crackled with unspoken dismissals, futures uncertain. Outside, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. James Thornton, a prominent financial advisor, stepped out, his presence radiating an air of quiet power. He exchanged a brief, knowing glance with Martha, a silent acknowledgement of a prearranged signal. He'd been waiting nearby, ready to intervene should the situation escalate beyond retrieval. He had known Martha and Joseph for decades, witnessing their unwavering commitment to philanthropy and their quiet disdain for ostentation. He knew the donation to the Children's Hospital, a significant sum discreetly given, was the leverage they needed to subtly orchestrate this encounter, a calculated move to expose the shallow judgments that permeated establishments like Finest Jewels. As Martha and Joseph stepped out of the store, the afternoon sun glinting off the large diamond ring, Martha wore a ring she rarely displayed. Preferring simple elegance, Joseph placed his hand in hers, a silent comfort, a shared understanding of the charade they'd just enacted. They hadn't sought revenge, but a quiet, potent lesson. And a lesson, they knew, had been delivered. The true measure of wealth, they believed, wasn't displayed in glittering jewels or expensive attire. It was woven into the fabric of their character, their compassion, and their unwavering commitment to a world beyond the superficial gleam of precious stones.